The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain as Staff Sergeant Maya Chen adjusted her rifle scope for the third time in 10 minutes. Her team of 8 special operations soldiers had been tracking a high-value target through the mountains of Afghanistan for 6 days. Intelligence reports indicated that Commander Rashid Malik, a key Taliban leader responsible for coordinating attacks on NATO supply routes, was holed up in a compound just beyond the ridge they currently occupied. Maya wiped the sweat from her brow and glanced at her watch. The operation was supposed to begin at dawn, but their communications equipment had malfunctioned during the night. Without radio contact to headquarters, they were operating blind. Captain Rodriguez, their team leader, had made the decision to proceed anyway. The window of opportunity to capture Malik was closing fast. "Chun, what do you see down there?" Rodriguez whispered as he crawled up beside her position. Maya peered through her scope again. The compound below consisted of 3 buildings arranged in a U shape around a central courtyard. Mud brick walls surrounded the entire area, with only one visible entrance. She counted at least 12 armed men moving between the buildings, but the real number could be much higher. 12 tangos visible, sir. Probably more inside the buildings. The target building is the largest one on the right. That's where Malik should be according to intel. Maya kept her voice low and steady, despite the knot forming in her stomach. Rodriguez nodded grimly. "We stick to the plan. Ramirez and Thompson will create a distraction on the east side. While they draw attention, we'll breach from the west. Chun, you provide overwatch from here. Pick your shots carefully." Maya had earned her position as the team's designated marksman through countless hours of training and several previous deployments. She could hit a target at 800 meters in perfect conditions, but today the wind was picking up and dust was beginning to swirl in the valley below. These were far from perfect conditions. The team began moving into position. Maya watched through her scope as Rodriguez led 5 soldiers down the rocky slope toward the compound's western wall. Ramirez and Thompson disappeared around the eastern edge of the valley, carrying explosives to create their diversion. Everything started going wrong at exactly 0730 hours. The explosion from the eastern side came right on schedule, a thunderous boom that echoed off the mountains and sent a column of black smoke rising into the morning sky. Maya watched the armed men in the compound rush toward the sound, just as planned. Rodriguez and his team reached the western wall and began placing their breaching charges. Then, the shooting started from somewhere it shouldn't have. Muzzle flashes erupted from the hills behind Maya's position. She spun around to see at least 20 enemy fighters emerging from concealed positions in the rocks. They had walked straight into an ambush. The Taliban had known they were coming. "Contact rear," Maya shouted into her radio, forgetting for a moment that their communications were down. Bullets whined overhead as she rolled behind a large boulder. The enemy had positioned themselves perfectly to catch the team in a crossfire between the compound below and the heights above. Maya could hear Rodriguez's voice carried on the wind, shouting orders to his men near the compound wall. They were pinned down between the western wall and an irrigation ditch, with enemy fire coming from multiple directions. The diversion team, Ramirez and Thompson, had gone silent after their explosion. She was alone on the ridge with enemies above and below, and her team was trapped in the kill zone. Maya forced herself to breathe slowly and think clearly. Panic would get everyone killed. She had ammunition, a good position, and years of training. The enemy fighters above her were advancing in a loose skirmish line, firing as they moved. They were confident, probably because they outnumbered her 20-1. Their confidence was about to become their weakness. Maya selected her first target, a bearded fighter who appeared to be giving orders to the others. He was approximately 300 meters away, moving left to right across her field of view. She controlled her breathing, let half the air out of her lungs, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Through her scope, she watched the enemy leader spin and fall. The other fighters immediately hit the ground, suddenly, much less confident about their advance. She shifted to a new position behind a different boulder before they could locate her muzzle flash. The rocky terrain provided excellent cover if she kept moving. Maya had studied these mountains during their approach march, memorizing the locations of boulders, crevices, and dead ground. Her second shot dropped a fighter who was trying to flank her position on the left. The man had thought he was concealed behind a small rise, but Maya could see his rifle barrel protruding past the edge. She put a bullet through the rise and into the man behind it. Now the enemy knew they were facing a skilled sniper, and their advance stalled completely. Maya used the brief lull to check on her team below. Through her scope, she could see Rodriguez and four other soldiers still pinned behind the irrigation ditch. One man was clearly wounded, being dragged to better cover by his teammates. Enemy fighters from the compound were maintaining steady fire from windows and rooftops. The situation was desperate, but Maya had an idea. The enemy fighters on the ridge were focused on finding her, which meant they had their backs to the compound. If she could work her way around to the right flank, she might be able to engage the fighters in the compound from an unexpected angle. It would mean leaving her overwatch position and getting much closer to the action, but her team was running out of time. Maya gathered her equipment and began moving. The rocky ground was treacherous, loose stones threatening to give away her position with every step. She stayed low, using the natural contours of the mountainside to mask her movement. A bullet cracked past her ear, followed immediately by the sound of the rifle that fired it. One of the enemy fighters had spotted her movement. Maya dropped flat and rolled behind a cluster of rocks as more shots rang out. Chips of stone flew as bullets struck all around her position. She was trapped again, but this time much closer to the enemy. Maya controlled her breathing and tried to locate the shooter. The shots were coming from her left, probably from behind a large boulder about 150 meters away. She could see the tip of a rifle barrel moving slightly as the shooter searched for a better angle. Maya pulled a fragmentation grenade from her vest. The throw would have to be perfect, too short, and the grenade would roll back down the slope toward her. Too long, and it would sail harmlessly over the enemy position. She estimated the distance, calculated the arc, and threw. The grenade exploded exactly where she had aimed it. The rifle fire from that position stopped immediately, but now every enemy fighter on the ridge knew exactly where she was. Maya heard boots crunching on gravel as multiple fighters began moving toward her position. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they would have her surrounded. The cluster of rocks that protected her was too small to provide cover from multiple directions. Time to move again. Maya sprinted from her cover, zigzagging between boulders as rifle fire erupted behind her. A bullet tugged at her sleeve. Another sparked off a rock inches from her head. She dove behind a low stone wall that had probably once marked a property boundary, landing hard and rolling to absorb the impact. From this new position, Maya could see 3 enemy fighters advancing on her previous location. They were moving carelessly, thinking they had her cornered. She proved them wrong with 3 quick shots, her rifle cycling smoothly as each target fell. The remaining fighters became much more cautious after that demonstration. Maya used their hesitation to continue her movement toward the compound. She was now close enough to hear individual voices shouting in Pashto from the buildings below. Rodriguez and his team were still pinned down, but Maya noticed that the volume of fire from the compound had decreased significantly. The enemy fighters inside were probably running low on ammunition, or their leaders were repositioning men to deal with the threat on the ridge. Maya found a position with a clear view of the compound's main building. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes from several windows. The fighters inside had good cover, but they had made one critical mistake. They were so focused on the trapped soldiers in the irrigation ditch that they had forgotten to watch for threats from other directions. Maya began engaging targets in the windows systematically. Her first shot silenced a machine gun position on the second floor. Her second dropped a sniper who had been firing from behind sandbags on the roof. Each shot was carefully aimed and precisely placed. The return fire from the compound became wild and inaccurate as the defenders realized they were being attacked from an unexpected direction. Maya could hear officers shouting orders, trying to coordinate their response, but confusion was spreading through their ranks. She was making a difference, but the enemy fighters on the ridge behind her were still advancing. Maya could hear them calling to each other as they coordinated their approach. Soon they would have her position surrounded. Maya made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone else. Instead of retreating or finding better cover, she began moving directly toward the compound. The closer she got, the better angles she would have on the enemy positions. More importantly, the fighters on the ridge would hesitate to shoot down into the compound where their allies were positioned. The descent was treacherous. Maya half slid, half climbed down the rocky slope, using her free hand to control her movement while keeping her rifle ready. Loose stones clattered away beneath her feet, but the sound was masked by the ongoing gunfight. She reached a position just 50 meters from the compound's eastern wall. From here, Maya could see into the courtyard through the main gate. At least 6 fighters were positioned there, some firing through the gate toward Rodriguez's team, others scanning the mountains for threats. Maya's rifle spoke 6 times in rapid succession. Each shot found its mark with deadly precision. The fighters in the courtyard fell one by one, their weapons clattering to the ground as they collapsed. Silence fell over the compound like a blanket. Maya used the momentary quiet to reload her rifle and assess the situation. The immediate threat from the compound had been neutralized, but she could still hear movement from inside the buildings. More fighters were certainly inside, probably including her primary target, Commander Malik. Behind her, the enemy fighters on the ridge were shouting frantically. They had lost sight of her during her descent and were unsure where she had gone. Some were beginning to move down the slope, but they were being extremely cautious after witnessing the fate of their comrades. Maya saw Rodriguez gesture from his position behind the irrigation ditch. He was pointing toward the compound's main building and holding up 3 fingers, then making a throat-cutting motion. 3 targets remaining in the primary building, including the high-value target they had come to capture. The mission was still achievable, but Maya was now completely alone against unknown numbers of enemies both above and below her position. The smart tactical decision would be to withdraw and call for extraction. But Maya knew that opportunities to capture high-value targets like Commander Malik were rare and precious. She began moving toward the compound's main building, her rifle ready, and her mind focused on the task ahead. The most dangerous part of the mission was just beginning. Maya pressed her back against the mud brick wall of the compound, listening to the sounds from inside the main building. Voices spoke in hushed Pashto. Footsteps moved across wooden floors above her head, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the static crackle of a radio. The enemy was trying to call for reinforcements. She glanced back toward Rodriguez's position. Her team leader was using hand signals to communicate that they would advance on his signal. Maya held up her palm, indicating they should wait. She needed to clear the building methodically, and additional movement would only complicate the situation. The main building had 2 stories with a flat roof. Maya had observed 3 windows on the ground floor during her earlier surveillance, plus the main entrance and what appeared to be a rear door. The upper floor had 4 windows, 2 facing the courtyard and 2 overlooking the valley beyond. Maya crept along the eastern wall toward the rear of the building. If she could enter through the back door, she might catch the defenders focused on the wrong direction. Every step required careful placement to avoid loose stones or debris that might give away her position. A window above her head suddenly opened with a soft creak. Maya froze, pressing herself deeper into the shadow of the wall. A rifle barrel emerged from the window, followed by a bearded face scanning the compound below. The fighter was looking for targets in the courtyard, completely unaware that his enemy was directly beneath him. Maya slowly raised her rifle, angling it upward. The shot would be difficult from this position, but she had trained for unusual angles and awkward firing positions. She controlled her breathing, found her natural point of aim, and squeezed the trigger. The suppressed rifle made a sharp crack, much quieter than her previous shots. The fighter above slumped forward and was still. Maya waited, listening for reactions from inside the building. Voices called out in Pashto, asking questions that received no answers. She continued toward the rear of the building. The back door was wooden, reinforced with metal straps, and slightly ajar. Maya could smell cigarette smoke drifting through the gap. Someone was standing just inside, probably guarding the rear entrance. Maya pulled her sidearm, a suppressed pistol that would be better suited for close-quarters combat. She counted to 3, then kicked the door open and rolled inside. The guard was exactly where she expected him to be, standing beside the doorway with his rifle pointed toward the courtyard. Maya's pistol fired twice before he could turn around. The man dropped without making a sound. She was now inside the building's ground floor, in what appeared to be a kitchen area. Clay pots and cooking utensils were scattered across wooden tables, and the air was thick with the smell of spices and smoke. A narrow staircase led to the upper floor, and she could hear movement directly above her head. Maya moved through the ground floor systematically, clearing each room. She found sleeping areas with rolled mats and blankets, storage rooms filled with ammunition and supplies, and a communication room with radio equipment still crackling with incoming transmissions. The voices on the radio were urgent, demanding status reports that would never come. The upper floor would be more dangerous. Maya climbed the wooden stairs slowly, testing each step to avoid creaks that might alert the remaining defenders. Her pistol was ready, safety off, finger on the trigger. At the top of the stairs, Maya found herself in a hallway with 3 doors. Light was visible under 2 of them, and she could hear voices from behind the middle door. That room was probably where she would find Commander Malik. Maya approached the first door and listened carefully. No sounds from inside. She tested the handle slowly and found it unlocked. The room was empty except for sleeping mats and personal equipment. Clearly a barracks area for the fighters she had already eliminated. The second door was where the voices were coming from. Maya could distinguish at least 2 different speakers, both male, conversing in rapid Pashto. One voice was giving orders while the other was asking questions. The authoritative voice probably belonged to Commander Malik. Maya positioned herself beside the door and prepared a flashbang grenade. The device would temporarily blind and disorient anyone inside the room. Giving her the advantage, she needed to take prisoners rather than simply eliminating threats. She pulled the pin, counted to 2, and tossed the grenade through the doorway. The explosion was deafening in the confined space. Maya immediately followed the grenade into the room, her pistol ready and her eyes scanning for targets. 2 men were stumbling around the room, temporarily blinded and disoriented by the flashbang. One was clearly Commander Malik, matching the photographs from her mission briefing. He was a thin man with a gray beard, wearing traditional Afghan clothing and reaching desperately for a rifle that had been knocked from his hands. The other man was younger, probably Malik's bodyguard or aide. He was recovering from the flashbang more quickly and already had his pistol halfway out of its holster. Maya shot the bodyguard twice in the chest before he could clear his weapon. Malik was still stumbling, blinded, and confused. Maya moved quickly to secure him, pulling plastic zip ties from her gear to bind his hands behind his back. Commander Rashid Malik, Maya said in English, knowing he would understand. Intelligence reports indicated that he had studied in Pakistan and spoke several languages. You are under arrest. Malik's vision was clearing, and he stared at Maya with a mixture of surprise and rage. American woman soldier, he said with a heavy accent. You think you have won something here? Maya ignored his question and activated her emergency beacon. Even with their communications down, the beacon would send a GPS signal to any friendly aircraft in the area. Extraction would take time, but at least headquarters would know their location. That's when she heard the sound that made her blood run cold. Vehicle engines, multiple vehicles, approaching the compound at high speed. Maya moved to the window and looked out toward the valley. A convoy of trucks was racing up the dirt road toward the compound. She counted at least 4 vehicles, probably carrying 40 or more fighters. The radio transmissions she had heard earlier had gotten through. Enemy reinforcements were arriving. She keyed her radio, hoping against hope that communications might be working. Rodriguez, do you copy? Enemy reinforcements inbound from the south. Multiple vehicles. Static was her only answer. Maya looked at her prisoner. Commander Malik was smiling now, showing yellowed teeth. My men will be here soon, American. You should have killed me when you had the chance. Maya checked her ammunition. She had 2 magazines left for her rifle, 1 for her pistol, and 3 grenades. Against 40 or more enemy fighters, her supplies would not last long. She needed to get Malik out of the building and link up with Rodriguez's team before the reinforcements arrived. But first, she had to deal with the remaining threat on the ridge. Maya moved back to the window facing the mountains. Through her rifle scope, she could see the enemy fighters who had been pursuing her earlier. They were approximately 200 meters away, taking cover behind rocks and trying to find good firing positions overlooking the compound. When the reinforcements arrived, they would coordinate with the fighters on the ridge to surround the entire area. Maya made a quick decision. She would eliminate the threat on the ridge first, then worry about extraction. She forced Malik to lie flat on the floor and zip-tied his feet as well as his hands. "If you move or make any sound, I will kill you," she told him simply. Malik's smile faded as he realized she was serious. Maya returned to the window with her rifle. The enemy fighters on the ridge had good cover, but they were positioned predictably. They were trying to watch both her building and Rodriguez's position simultaneously, which meant they were spread out in a long line. Maya began working from left to right, engaging each position methodically. Her first shot dropped a fighter who was trying to set up a machine gun. Her second eliminated a spotter who was calling out target locations to his teammates. The remaining fighters immediately went to ground, but Maya had the advantage of elevation and a good scope. She could see parts of their bodies that they thought were concealed. A shoulder behind a rock, a foot extending past a crevice, the top of a head above a stone wall. Each became a target. Maya's shooting was clinical and precise. She had trained for this scenario countless times, engaging multiple targets from a fixed position. The key was to maintain steady breathing, smooth trigger control, and quick target transitions. Within 5 minutes, the ridge was silent. Maya checked her watch. The enemy reinforcements would arrive in approximately 10 minutes, based on the distance they had to travel. She needed to move immediately. She hauled Malik to his feet and pushed him toward the stairs. "Move," she ordered. The commander stumbled, but obeyed. Maya kept her pistol pressed against his back as they descended to the ground floor. At the bottom of the stairs, Maya heard the sound she had been hoping for. Rodriguez's voice, calling out the recognition signal they had established before the mission began. "Falcon, this is Eagle," he called from outside the building. Maya responded with the proper countersign. "Eagle, this is Falcon. I have the package. Reinforcements inbound from the south. ETA 8 minutes. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway with 2 other soldiers. Both looked wounded but mobile. "Where are Thompson and Ramirez?" Maya asked. Rodriguez's expression was grim. "Ramirez took shrapnel from his own explosive. Thompson is carrying him. They're moving toward the extraction point, but they're not going to make it before the reinforcements arrive." Maya looked around the compound. The walls were too low to provide effective cover against the incoming vehicles, and the open ground beyond offered no concealment for a withdrawal. They were trapped unless they could find another option. "What about the vehicles in the compound?" Maya asked, gesturing toward 2 pickup trucks parked near the main building. Rodriguez shook his head. "Already checked. No keys, and we don't have time to hotwire them." Maya studied the tactical situation. Enemy reinforcements approaching from the south, wounded teammates moving slowly toward an extraction point they might not reach, and no vehicles for rapid movement. The situation seemed hopeless. Then, she noticed something that changed everything. Behind the main building, partially concealed by a tarp, was a motorcycle. It was an old Soviet-era bike, probably left over from the Russian occupation decades earlier, but it looked functional. Maya pointed toward the motorcycle. "Can you ride that?" Rodriguez followed her gaze and nodded slowly. "It's been a while, but yes." Maya made a quick decision that would either save her team or get them all killed. "Take Malik and the bike. Head for the extraction point. I'll delay the reinforcements and cover your withdrawal." Rodriguez stared at her. "Chun, that's suicide. There are at least 40 fighters in those trucks." Maya checked her remaining ammunition again. 2 rifle magazines, 1 pistol magazine, 3 grenades. Against 40 enemies, she would need to make every shot count. "Not if I choose the right position and use the terrain," Maya said. "The road winds through that narrow valley before reaching the compound. If I can catch them in the defile, the vehicles become a disadvantage instead of an advantage." Rodriguez was already shaking his head. "We're not leaving you behind." Maya grabbed him by the shoulders. "Sir, the mission is to capture Malik. That requires getting him to the extraction point alive. I can delay the enemy long enough for you to reach Thompson and Ramirez, then call in close air support. But only if you leave now." The sound of engines was growing louder. The enemy convoy was less than 5 minutes away. Rodriguez looked at Maya for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. 5 minutes, Chun. Then We call in the cavalry whether you're clear or not." Maya smiled grimly. 5 minutes is all I need." She watched Rodriguez and his soldiers load the unconscious Commander Malik onto the motorcycle and start the engine. The bike coughed and sputtered, but caught on the third try. They roared out of the compound and disappeared around a bend in the valley, racing towards safety. Maya was alone again, but this time she was exactly where she wanted to be. She gathered her remaining equipment and began moving toward the narrow valley where the enemy convoy would have to pass. The next few minutes would determine whether her team's mission succeeded or failed, whether Commander Malik reached American custody or returned to planning attacks against coalition forces. Maya had never failed a mission, and she didn't plan to start today. Maya sprinted from the compound toward the narrow section of the valley road where she planned to make her stand. The terrain here was perfect for what military tacticians called a kill zone, a place where enemy forces would be trapped and vulnerable. The road wound between two steep ridges of rock, creating a natural bottleneck that would force the convoy to slow down and bunch up. She climbed quickly up the eastern ridge, finding a position about halfway to the top, where she had clear fields of fire in both directions along the road. Large boulders provided cover, and the angle would allow her to engage vehicles from above. Maya checked her watch. The convoy would arrive in approximately 3 minutes. Maya laid out her equipment methodically. 2 rifle magazines, each containing 30 rounds. 1 pistol magazine with 15 rounds. 3 fragmentation grenades. She also had smoke grenades, but those would be useless in the current situation. This would be a straight fight with no room for deception or misdirection. The key to her plan was understanding how vehicle convoys operated in hostile territory. The lead vehicle would contain scouts and a machine gun team. The rear vehicle would have the heavy weapons and additional security. The middle vehicles would carry the bulk of the troops. If Maya could disable the lead and rear vehicles quickly, she could trap the entire convoy in the kill zone. Maya heard the convoy before she saw it. Diesel engines straining as the drivers pushed their vehicles up the mountain road, gears shifting as they navigated the winding turns. The sound echoed off the valley walls, making it seem like the vehicles were approaching from multiple directions. The first truck rounded the bend below her position, moving fast. It was a Soviet-era military transport, painted in faded camouflage with a heavy machine gun mounted in the back. Maya could see 4 fighters in the truck bed, scanning the ridges for threats. They had learned to be cautious after the ambush at the compound. Maya let the lead vehicle pass beneath her position. She wanted all 4 trucks in the kill zone before she opened fire. The second vehicle appeared 30 seconds later, followed closely by the third and fourth. Just as she had predicted, the convoy was bunched up due to the narrow road. Maya selected her first target, the rear vehicle. She aimed for the engine block, knowing that a disabled truck would block the road and prevent the convoy from backing out of the ambush. Her rifle cracked, and steam immediately began pouring from under the truck's hood. The vehicle rolled to a stop, effectively sealing the southern end of the kill zone. She immediately shifted her aim to the lead vehicle, which was now trying to accelerate out of the valley. Her second shot punched through the rear window and into the cab. The truck swerved wildly and crashed into the western wall of the valley, blocking the northern exit. The convoy was trapped exactly as Maya had planned. Fighters began pouring out of the middle vehicles, seeking cover behind the trucks and in the rocky debris along the roadside. Maya began engaging individual targets, picking off anyone who exposed themselves. Her shooting was methodical and deadly accurate. Each shot was carefully aimed and precisely placed. A machine gun team tried to set up a position behind the second truck. Maya's rifle spoke twice, and both the gunner and his assistant fell before they could return fire. Another group of fighters attempted to climb the western ridge to flank her position. Maya shifted her fire to them, dropping 3 men in quick succession. The enemy response was chaotic and poorly coordinated. Without effective leadership, the fighters were reacting instead of executing a planned counterattack. Maya used their confusion to maintain the initiative, keeping them pinned down while systematically reducing their numbers. But Maya knew she couldn't hold this position indefinitely. The enemy had superior numbers, and eventually they would coordinate an effective assault on her ridge. She needed to keep them off balance while conserving ammunition for the critical moments ahead. Maya reached for one of her fragmentation grenades. The range was long for a hand-thrown grenade, but the elevation would help. She estimated the distance to the cluster of vehicles below, calculated the trajectory, and threw with all her strength. The grenade exploded directly between the second and third vehicles, sending shrapnel in all directions. Several fighters who had been using the trucks for cover were caught in the blast. The explosion also punctured fuel tanks, causing diesel to pour onto the road. Maya immediately threw her second grenade, aiming for the spreading pool of fuel. The explosion ignited the diesel, creating a wall of flame that separated the fighters into two groups. Some were trapped on the northern side of the fire, others on the southern side. Neither group could coordinate with the other. The flames also created thick black smoke that drifted across the valley. Maya used the concealment to change positions, moving 50 meters south along the ridge to a new firing position. When the enemy fighters tried to return fire at her previous location, they found only empty rocks. From her new position, Maya continued engaging targets. A fighter tried to use the smoke as concealment to climb the eastern ridge toward her general area. Maya tracked his movement through her scope and dropped him when he emerged from the smoke cloud. Another group tried to establish a firing position among the rocks on the western side of the valley. Maya's accurate rifle fire forced them to abandon the attempt. Maya checked her ammunition status. She had used one full magazine and was halfway through her second. Time was running out, but the enemy was running out of fighters even faster. She estimated that she had eliminated at least 20 of the original 40 fighters, and many of the survivors were wounded or too demoralized to fight effectively. That's when Maya heard the sound that changed everything again. Helicopter rotors, approaching from the east. Maya's heart sank as she realized that the enemy had called for air support. A helicopter would be able to spot her position easily and engage her with rockets or machine gun fire. Her cover might protect her from small arms fire, but it would be useless against aerial attack. Maya frantically searched the sky, trying to locate the incoming aircraft. The sound of rotors was growing louder, but the smoke from the burning vehicles was making it difficult to see clearly. She prepared to make a run for better cover when she heard a familiar sound that made her smile. The distinctive whop-whop-whop of American helicopter rotors, different from the sound made by Soviet-era aircraft. Maya looked up to see a pair of AH-64 Apache attack helicopters cresting the eastern ridge. The lead aircraft immediately began engaging targets in the valley below with its 30mm chain gun. The second helicopter circled to the south, blocking any escape routes for the surviving enemy fighters. Maya activated her infrared strobe light, marking her position for the friendly aircraft. The lead Apache pilot acknowledged her signal by waggling his aircraft's nose, then resumed engaging enemy positions in the valley. The fight was over in less than 2 minutes. The Apache helicopters methodically destroyed the remaining vehicles and eliminated any fighters who continued to resist. Those who threw down their weapons and surrendered were spared, but most of the Taliban fighters chose to fight to the end. When the shooting stopped, Maya could hear the sound of additional helicopters approaching. A Black Hawk transport helicopter landed in a clear area near the compound, and she watched her teammates emerge from the aircraft. Rodriguez was there, along with Thompson carrying the wounded Ramirez. Even Commander Malik was visible, securely bound and under heavy guard. Maya made her way down from the ridge, moving carefully through the rocky terrain. Her legs felt unsteady after the intense combat, and she realized that adrenaline had been keeping her going for the past hour. Now that the immediate danger was over, exhaustion was setting in. Rodriguez met her at the bottom of the ridge with a broad smile on his face. Outstanding work, Chun. Command says this is the biggest intelligence coup in the region this year. Maya looked back at the burning vehicles in the valley. What's our casualty report? Rodriguez's expression became more serious. Ramirez will be fine. Shrapnel wounds, nothing life-threatening. Everyone else came through without a scratch. You eliminated approximately 30 enemy fighters single-handedly. That's going to be hard to believe in the after-action report. Maya shrugged. Good position, good fields of fire, and poor enemy tactics. They made it easy. Rodriguez shook his head. Chun, there's nothing easy about what you just accomplished. You saved this entire operation and probably prevented Malik from escaping to organize more attacks against our forces. A medic approached and began checking Maya for injuries. She had several small cuts from flying rock chips and stone fragments, but nothing serious. The medic cleaned and bandaged the wounds quickly. The helicopter pilots were eager to leave the area. Even with the immediate threat eliminated, they were deep in enemy territory and vulnerable to additional attacks. Maya gathered her equipment and climbed aboard the Black Hawk with the rest of her team. As the helicopter lifted off and turned toward their base, Maya looked down at the valley below. The burning vehicles sent columns of black smoke into the clear mountain air. In a few hours, other Taliban fighters would arrive to investigate what had happened. They would find their vehicles destroyed, their fighters dead, and their commander gone. Maya hoped the message would be clear. American Special Operations Forces could strike anywhere, at any time, with devastating effect. The Taliban might control the mountains during the day, but at night the valleys belonged to soldiers like Maya and her team. Rodriguez handed Maya a water bottle and an energy bar. "Eat something," he said. "We'll be back at base in 30 minutes, and then you'll have to sit through hours of debriefings with intelligence officers." Maya took a drink of water and looked around the helicopter cabin. Her teammates were exhausted, but alert, scanning the landscape below for potential threats even though they were flying at high altitude. Ramirez was conscious and talking, a good sign that his wounds were not severe. Commander Malik sat silently between two guards, staring out the window at the mountains that had been his sanctuary until today. Maya leaned back against the helicopter's bulkhead and closed her eyes for a moment. In the space of 4 hours, she had eliminated over 30 enemy fighters, captured a high-value target, and saved her entire team from annihilation. It was the kind of operation that Special Forces soldiers trained for their entire careers, but few ever actually experienced. The helicopter began its descent toward their forward operating base. Maya could see the landing pad and the cluster of buildings surrounded by protective barriers and guard towers. In a few minutes, she would be safe behind friendly lines, drinking hot coffee and eating a real meal. But Maya knew that this mission was just one small part of a much larger conflict. Tomorrow, or next week, or next month, she would be back in these mountains hunting other high-value targets. The Taliban would adapt their tactics based on today's lesson, becoming more cautious and harder to find. Maya smiled slightly as she thought about that. Let them become more cautious. Let them look over their shoulders and jump at shadows. Fear was a weapon too, and today's operation would spread that weapon throughout the Taliban network. The helicopter touched down with a gentle bump, and Maya heard the engines beginning to wind down. She gathered her equipment and prepared to exit the aircraft. There would be debriefings and paperwork, medical examinations, and weapons maintenance. But first, Maya planned to call her sister back in Colorado and tell her that everything was fine, that she was safe, and that she would be home for Christmas leave in 2 months. She wouldn't mention the ambush or the firefight or the 30 enemy fighters she had eliminated single-handedly. Some stories were better left untold, at least until the war was over and the classified reports became historical documents. Maya preferred it that way. She was a soldier, not a hero, and heroes attracted too much attention. Maya Chun was perfectly content to remain the Taliban's worst nightmare and her country's best-kept secret. 6 months after the mountain ambush, Maya Chun found herself in a very different kind of battlefield. The briefing room at Bagram Airfield was filled with officers from multiple intelligence agencies, all focused on a large map of eastern Afghanistan projected onto the wall. Red pins marked known Taliban positions, blue pins indicated friendly forces, and yellow pins showed areas of recent enemy activity. Colonel Harrison, the regional intelligence chief, was explaining why Maya had been specifically requested for this mission. "Gentlemen, Staff Sergeant Chin's actions during Operation Mountain Lion have had significant strategic impact. Intelligence intercepts show that Taliban commanders are now reluctant to concentrate their forces in the eastern provinces. They're afraid of another precision strike." Maya sat quietly in the back row, uncomfortable with the attention. She preferred to let her actions speak rather than sitting through briefings about her previous successes. But this mission was different from her usual assignments. Instead of hunting a single high-value target, she was being asked to train a team of Afghan National Army soldiers in advanced marksmanship techniques. The Afghan government was attempting to build an elite sniper unit that could operate independently of American support. Maya's job was to evaluate the candidates and provide training to those who showed promise. It was a delicate mission that required cultural sensitivity as well as tactical expertise. Captain Rodriguez, who had been promoted after their successful capture of Commander Malik, leaned over to whisper to Maya. The Afghan candidates arrived yesterday. Want to know what they think of having a female instructor? Maya kept her expression neutral. I'm sure they'll adjust their attitudes quickly enough. Rodriguez grinned. I wouldn't bet against you. After the briefing, Maya walked across the airfield to the training facility that had been established for the sniper program. The building was a converted aircraft hangar with shooting lanes at one end and classroom space at the other. A 500-meter rifle range extended out onto the flat ground beyond the hangar. 12 Afghan soldiers were waiting inside the building, standing at attention in a neat formation. They wore the standard uniform of the Afghan National Army, but Maya could tell immediately that these were experienced fighters. Their eyes moved constantly, scanning for threats even in the secure environment of the base. Several had visible scars from previous combat. The unit commander was Captain Khalil Ahmadi, a thin man with intelligent eyes and a carefully groomed beard. He spoke English with a British accent, probably educated in Pakistan or India. Staff Sergeant Chun, he said formally. My men and I are honored to learn from such a distinguished soldier. Maya studied the formation carefully. The soldiers' attitudes ranged from curious to skeptical to openly hostile. Several were clearly uncomfortable with the idea of receiving instruction from a woman. Others seemed more concerned with her rank, wondering why they were being trained by a sergeant instead of an officer. Captain Ahmadi, Maya replied, I understand that some of your men may have concerns about this training program. I suggest we address those concerns directly rather than pretending they don't exist. Ahmadi nodded slowly. What do you propose? Maya walked to the front of the formation and studied each soldier individually. I propose a demonstration. Any of your men who believe they can outshoot me are welcome to try. We'll have a competition using these training rifles. She gestured toward a rack of bolt-action rifles that had been set up for the program. They were civilian hunting rifles, accurate, but without the advanced optics and specialized ammunition used by military snipers. One of the Afghan soldiers, a large man with a prominent scar across his cheek, stepped forward. I am Sergeant Nazir, he announced. I have been fighting in these mountains for 15 years. I do not believe that American woman knows our conditions. Maya nodded respectfully. Sergeant Nazir, I accept your challenge. What distance would you prefer? Nazir consulted with several of his comrades, speaking rapid Pashto. Maya caught enough words to understand that they were discussing what would be a fair test. Finally, Nazir turned back to her. 300 meters. 5 shots each. Best group wins. Maya agreed to the terms. 300 meters was a reasonable distance for a marksmanship competition, long enough to test skill, but short enough to eliminate most environmental factors. The Afghan soldiers were confident that their local knowledge would give them an advantage. Both shooters selected rifles from the rack and examined them carefully. Maya checked the scope mounting, tested the trigger pull, and dry-fired several times to get a feel for the weapon. It was a quality rifle, well-maintained, but not exceptional. The scope was adequate for the task. Sergeant Nazir went first. He took his time setting up his shooting position, adjusting the rifle, and testing the wind conditions with a piece of grass. His shooting position was solid, and his trigger control appeared smooth. Maya could tell that he was indeed an experienced marksman. Nazir's 5 shots were well placed, creating a tight group near the center of the target. When the range officer measured the group, it was 4 inches from center to center. For a hunting rifle at 300 meters, it was impressive shooting. Now it was Maya's turn. She approached the firing line with calm confidence, knowing that 11 pairs of eyes were watching her every move. This was about more than marksmanship. This was about establishing her credibility as an instructor and earning the respect of soldiers who had been fighting longer than she had been in the military. Maya took a different approach than Nazir had used. Instead of spending time reading wind conditions, she focused on establishing perfect consistency in her shooting position. She had learned that with hunting rifles, minor variations in hold and trigger control had more impact on accuracy than small changes in wind. Maya fired her 5 shots in steady succession, each one feeling identical to the last. The rifle recoiled the same way each time, her breathing pattern was consistent, and her trigger squeeze was smooth and straight back. When she was finished, she cleared the rifle and stepped back from the firing line. The range officer examined Maya's target through binoculars, then walked out to measure the group personally. When he returned, he announced the results in both English and Pashto. Staff Sergeant Chun, 2.5 inches, center to center. A murmur of surprise ran through the Afghan soldiers. Maya had not only beaten Nazir's group, she had done it by a significant margin. More importantly, she had done it with apparent ease, without the elaborate preparation that many shooters relied upon. Captain Ahmadi stepped forward. Most impressive, Staff Sergeant. I believe my men are ready to begin their instruction. Maya smiled slightly. Actually, Captain, I think we should let anyone else who wants to try have their chance first. The best way to learn is to understand your current skill level. Over the next 2 hours, Maya shot against each of the Afghan soldiers who wanted to challenge her. Some were very good marksmen, others were barely adequate. Maya beat them all, but, more importantly, she used each competition as a teaching moment. When a soldier's shots were consistently low and to the left, Maya explained how improper trigger control caused that error pattern. When another soldier's group was large and scattered, she demonstrated how breathing technique affected accuracy. Each lesson was practical and immediate, tied directly to what the soldiers had just experienced. By the end of the day, the attitude in the hangar had completely changed. The Afghan soldiers were asking Maya questions about equipment, techniques, and tactics. They wanted to know how she had learned to shoot so well, what training methods she recommended, and how they could improve their own skills. Maya spent the evening in her quarters, preparing lesson plans for the formal training that would begin the next day. The competition had served its purpose, establishing her credentials and earning the respect of the trainees. Now the real work would begin. The training program was scheduled to last 6 weeks. Maya would teach everything from basic marksmanship fundamentals to advanced concepts like shooting in different weather conditions and engaging targets at extreme ranges. More importantly, she would help the Afghan soldiers develop their own training methods so they could eventually teach other soldiers. Maya's approach to instruction was methodical and patient. She believed that building fundamentals was more important than trying to teach advanced techniques too quickly. Each day began with dry fire practice, where soldiers would practice their shooting positions and trigger control without actually firing ammunition. After the fundamentals practice, they moved to live-fire exercises at progressively longer ranges. Maya started each soldier at 100 meters, ensuring that they could achieve consistent accuracy before moving to greater distances. Only when a soldier could consistently hit a 4-inch target at 100 meters would she allow them to attempt 200 meters. The Afghan soldiers adapted to Maya's teaching methods surprisingly quickly. They were accustomed to learning through repetition and practice, and they appreciated her emphasis on building solid fundamentals. Several showed exceptional promise as potential instructors themselves. Sergeant Nazir, the soldier who had initially challenged Maya's competence, became one of her most dedicated students. He asked detailed questions about equipment selection, ammunition performance, and shooting techniques. Maya realized that his initial challenge had not been based on disrespect, but on a desire to ensure that his men would receive quality instruction. After 2 weeks of training, Maya began introducing more advanced concepts. She taught the Afghan soldiers how to estimate range without using electronic equipment, how to read wind conditions from natural indicators, and how to adjust their shooting techniques for different types of targets. The most important lesson Maya taught was patience. Many of the Afghan soldiers were accustomed to rapid, close-range combat, where speed was more important than precision. Learning to be a sniper required a completely different mindset, one that valued careful observation and methodical preparation over aggressive action. Maya also taught practical fieldcraft skills that were not directly related to shooting. How to construct concealed positions, how to move through terrain without being detected, how to communicate with other team members using hand signals. These skills would be crucial for soldiers operating independently in hostile territory. As the training program progressed, Maya began to understand the broader strategic importance of what she was doing. The Afghan soldiers she was training would eventually return to their home provinces, where they would form the core of regional sniper programs. Her instruction would be multiplied many times over as these soldiers trained others. Maya also learned about the challenges facing the Afghan National Army. Many soldiers were poorly equipped and inadequately trained. Corruption was widespread, and unit cohesion was often weak. The sniper program was an attempt to create an elite cadre of soldiers who could serve as examples for the rest of the army. By the fourth week of training, Maya's students were engaging targets at distances up to 600 meters. Several soldiers had progressed to the point where they could consistently hit man-sized targets at that range under good conditions. Maya was pleased with their progress, but knew that real combat would be much more challenging than controlled training exercises. Maya decided to design a final test that would simulate some of the stresses and challenges of actual combat. She arranged for the Afghan soldiers to participate in a field exercise that would test not only their shooting skills, but also their ability to work as a team under pressure. The exercise would take place in the mountains outside Bagram, in terrain similar to what the soldiers would encounter when they returned to their operational units. Maya worked with Captain Rodriguez to design scenarios that would challenge the trainees without putting them in actual danger. As the training program entered its final phase, Maya reflected on how much the Afghan soldiers had improved. More importantly, she had seen their confidence grow as they mastered new skills. They were beginning to think like snipers, understanding the patience and precision that the role required. Maya knew that when these soldiers returned to their units, they would face challenges she could not prepare them for. They would operate with limited equipment, unreliable support, and constant danger. But she had given them the best training possible under the circumstances, and she was confident that they would use it well. The graduation ceremony was scheduled for the following week. Maya had already prepared her final evaluations of each student, noting their strengths and areas for continued development. After 6 weeks of intensive training, she was ready to send them back to their war with the skills they would need to survive and succeed. The final exercise began before dawn on a cold October morning. Maya and her 12 Afghan trainees had been inserted by helicopter into the mountains 40 kilometers northeast of Bagram Airfield. Their mission was to locate and neutralize a simulated enemy position while avoiding detection by opposing forces played by American soldiers from the base security detachment. Maya watched her students prepare for the exercise with professional satisfaction. 6 weeks of intensive training had transformed them from individual marksmen into a cohesive sniper team. They moved with quiet efficiency, checking equipment and reviewing their mission plan in whispered conversations. Captain Ahmadi approached Maya as his soldiers completed their preparations. "Staff Sergeant Chun, my men are ready. I want you to know that this training has exceeded our expectations. These soldiers will return to their provinces as different men than when they arrived." Maya nodded, studying the terrain around their insertion point. "Captain, the real test begins when they're operating independently in their home areas. Everything we've done here has been preparation for that moment." The exercise scenario was designed to test multiple skills simultaneously. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target was meeting with subordinates in a compound located in a valley approximately 8 kilometers from their current position. The sniper team's mission was to conduct reconnaissance of the target area, identify the high-value target, and eliminate him if an opportunity presented itself. The challenge was that American soldiers from the base security detachment were positioned throughout the area, simulating enemy patrols and security checkpoints. If the Afghan team was detected before reaching their objective, the exercise would be considered a failure regardless of their shooting performance. Maya had deliberately made the exercise difficult. Real combat missions rarely went according to plan, and she wanted her students to experience the stress and uncertainty they would face in actual operations. The team began moving through the mountains using tactics Maya had taught them during the previous weeks. They traveled in a loose formation that allowed mutual support while minimizing the chance that all members would be detected simultaneously. Each soldier was responsible for watching specific sectors as they moved. Maya followed approximately 100 meters behind the team, observing their performance and taking notes for her final evaluation. She was pleased to see that they were applying lessons learned during training. They moved quietly, used available cover effectively, and maintained good communication discipline. 2 hours into the movement, Sergeant Nazir raised his hand to signal a halt. Through hand signals, he indicated that he had spotted movement ahead. The team immediately went to ground, using natural concealment to avoid detection. Maya moved forward carefully to observe what Nazir had seen. 3 American soldiers were positioned at a trail junction, simulating an enemy checkpoint. They were not particularly well concealed, but they had good fields of observation in multiple directions. The Afghan team had 2 options. They could attempt to bypass the checkpoint by moving through more difficult terrain, or they could try to eliminate the simulated enemies using their weapons. Maya watched to see what decision Captain Ahmadi would make. Ahmadi studied the situation through his binoculars, then gathered his team leaders for a brief conference. After several minutes of quiet discussion, he made his decision. The team would split into 2 groups. One group would create a distraction while the other eliminated the checkpoint guards. The plan was executed flawlessly. 3 soldiers moved to a position where they could be deliberately detected by one of the checkpoint guards. When that guard moved to investigate, he exposed himself to fire from the second group. The exercise controllers ruled that all 3 checkpoint guards had been eliminated without alerting other friendly forces. Maya made notes about the team's performance. Their tactics were sound, their execution was professional, and their communication was excellent. More importantly, they had demonstrated the ability to think creatively under pressure. The team continued toward their objective, moving through increasingly difficult terrain. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the weather began to deteriorate. Wind picked up, and occasional snow flurries reduced visibility. These were exactly the conditions Maya wanted them to experience. By midday, the team had reached a position overlooking the target valley. The simulated enemy compound was clearly visible approximately 800 meters below their position. Maya watched through her own scope as the Afghan soldiers began their reconnaissance. The compound consisted of several buildings arranged around a central courtyard, similar to the layout where Maya had captured Commander Malik 6 months earlier. American soldiers playing enemy fighters moved between the buildings, simulating normal activity. One soldier, designated as the high-value target, wore distinctive clothing to make identification possible. Captain Ahmadi assigned observation sectors to each of his men and established a rotation schedule to ensure continuous surveillance. This was exactly the procedure Maya had taught them for long-duration reconnaissance missions. For the next 4 hours, the Afghan team maintained watch over the compound. They recorded movement patterns, identified guard positions, and waited for an opportunity to engage the high-value target. Maya was impressed by their patience and attention to detail. The opportunity finally came just before sunset. The high-value target emerged from the main building and walked to an open area in the courtyard where he could be clearly seen. The range was challenging but within the capabilities of Maya's students. Captain Ahmadi designated Sergeant Nazir as the primary shooter, with 2 other soldiers providing backup in case the first shot missed. Nazir settled into a solid shooting position and began his engagement sequence. Maya watched through her own scope as Nazir controlled his breathing and aligned his crosshairs. The wind was tricky, with swirling currents caused by the mountainous terrain. Nazir made a small adjustment to compensate for the wind, then smoothly squeezed his trigger. The blank cartridge fired with a sharp crack that echoed off the valley walls. Through the scope, Maya could see the exercise controller signal that the shot had been successful. The high-value target was eliminated, and the mission was complete. The Afghan team began their withdrawal immediately, following procedures Maya had emphasized throughout their training. They did not celebrate or congratulate each other until they were well away from the target area. Professional snipers completed their missions and departed without fanfare. The extraction helicopter arrived at the designated pickup zone exactly on schedule. As the team boarded the aircraft, Maya conducted a brief after-action review. She praised their tactical performance while noting areas where improvements could still be made. During the flight back to Bagram, Maya reflected on the entire training program. The Afghan soldiers had exceeded her expectations in every area. They had mastered the technical aspects of marksmanship, learned important tactical skills, and developed the mental discipline that successful snipers required. More importantly, they had learned to work as a team. Sniper operations often required close coordination between multiple operators, and Maya had seen excellent examples of teamwork throughout the final exercise. The graduation ceremony took place 2 days later in the same hangar where the training had begun 6 weeks earlier. Colonel Harrison presented certificates to each graduate, praising their dedication and professionalism. Maya was asked to give a brief speech about the program's success. 6 weeks ago, you were individual soldiers with good shooting skills, Maya told the assembled graduates. Today, you are trained snipers with the knowledge and experience to train others. But your real test will come when you return to your home provinces and begin applying what you have learned. Maya paused and looked at each graduate individually. Remember that being a sniper is about more than just shooting accurately. You are now responsible for teaching other soldiers, for gathering intelligence, and for making difficult decisions under pressure. Your country is depending on you to use these skills wisely. After the ceremony, Maya spent time with each graduate individually, providing final advice and answering last-minute questions. Several soldiers asked for recommendations about equipment procurement and advanced training opportunities. Sergeant Nazir approached Maya as she was preparing to leave the hangar. Staff Sergeant Chun, he said formally, I want to apologize for my attitude when you first arrived. I was wrong to judge you based on your gender rather than your abilities. Maya smiled and shook his hand. Sergeant Nazir, you challenged me to prove myself. That was the right thing to do. A good soldier always demands proof of competence from his instructors. Nazir nodded thoughtfully. I have learned much from you, not just about shooting but about leadership. When I return to my province, I will remember your example. That evening, Maya attended a farewell dinner hosted by Captain Ahmadi. The Afghan soldiers had prepared traditional food and invited several American officers who had supported the training program. The atmosphere was relaxed and friendly, very different from the formal military environment that had characterized most of their interactions. Captain Rodriguez pulled Maya aside during the dinner. Chun, I've got news about your next assignment. Command wants you to establish similar training programs in 2 other provinces. Apparently, word about this program's success has reached some very senior levels. Maya wasn't surprised by the news. She had expected that a successful program would lead to additional assignments. When do I leave? Rodriguez grinned. Not for another month. Command thinks you've earned some leave time after this assignment. Apparently, someone noticed that you haven't taken any time off in over a year. Maya looked around the room at the Afghan soldiers who were celebrating the completion of their training. In 1 month, they would be back in their home provinces, facing real enemies in actual combat. Some might be killed or wounded. Others might become instructors themselves, passing on the skills they had learned to new generations of soldiers. Maya felt a sense of satisfaction that was different from what she experienced after successful combat missions. Training these soldiers had been about building capabilities rather than destroying enemies. She had helped create something positive that would continue long after she had moved on to other assignments. The dinner lasted late into the evening. Maya listened to stories about the soldiers' home provinces, their families, and their plans for implementing their new training. She also answered questions about American military culture and shared some of her own experiences from previous deployments. As the evening wound down, Captain Ahmadi presented Maya with a gift from all the graduates. It was a traditional Afghan knife with an ornately carved handle. This belonged to my grandfather, Ahmadi explained. He carried it during the fight against the Soviets. I want you to have it as a symbol of respect from all of us. Maya was genuinely moved by the gesture. She had received awards and commendations from her own military chain of command, but this gift from the Afghan soldiers meant something different. It represented acceptance and respect from warriors who had been fighting in these mountains longer than she had been alive. 3 days later, Maya watched from the airfield as transport helicopters carried her former students back to their home provinces. She would probably never see most of them again, but she was confident that the skills and knowledge they had gained would serve them well. Maya's leave orders had been approved, and she would be flying back to the United States the following week. For the first time in over a year, She would be able to visit her family in Colorado and spend time away from the constant stress of combat operations. But Maya knew that she would be back. Afghanistan was far from pacified, and there would always be a need for soldiers with her specialized skills. Whether she was hunting high-value targets in the mountains or training local forces to defend their own country, Maya had found her calling in the remote valleys and rugged peaks of Central Asia. As Maya packed her equipment for the journey home, she reflected on how much her life had changed since joining the military. She had started as a young soldier looking for direction and purpose. Now she was a seasoned professional with skills that few people possessed and experiences that even fewer could understand. Maya Chun had become exactly what her country needed her to be, a precise and deadly instrument of war, capable of eliminating enemies with surgical accuracy while building the capabilities needed for long-term success. Whether she was pulling a trigger at 800 meters or teaching marksmanship fundamentals to Afghan soldiers, she was helping to win a war one shot at a time. The war would continue long after Maya's current deployment ended, but she had made her contribution. Somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, 12 Afghan soldiers were using skills she had taught them to protect their country and their people. That legacy would outlast any individual mission or operation. Maya finished packing and checked her travel orders one final time. In 18 hours, she would be on a plane heading home. But even as she looked forward to seeing her family and taking some well-earned rest, Maya knew that this war was far from over. She would be back, and when she returned, there would be new enemies to hunt and new allies to train. The mountains of Afghanistan would always need soldiers like Maya Chun, and she would always answer that call.